All right, so I'd like to welcome all of you to this UNT Retiree Association academic update from the Texas Center for Performing Arts Health. And as we just kind of discussed a little bit, you're all muted right now, but you're welcome to unmute yourself during today's session to ask questions or give any comments. Dr. Chesky would like to have an interactive session. We just sort of ask you to mute yourself once you're done speaking, and that'll cut back on any background noise that we hear. This session is being recorded. We got permission to do that for those who aren't able to join us live. So welcome to any of you who are watching this recording. And I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, who is Dr. Kris Chesky, who holds the rank of professor in the UNT College of Music and is co-director of the Texas Center for Performing Arts Health. He earned an undergraduate performance degree in trumpet from the Berklee College of Music in Boston, and for his PhD dissertation, he designed, patented, and applied computer-based technologies for investigating the pain-relieving effects of music vibration. As founding co-director of research and education for the Texas Center for Performing Arts Health, he developed and served as the executive director for the Health Promotion in Schools of Music project. The goal of this project was to ensure that all tertiary music programs in the United States offer occupational health education for all students seeking to become music professionals. So without further ado, Dr. Chesky, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jordan. And thanks to everybody for joining in and spending an hour with me this afternoon. I really appreciate it. Yeah, to my delight, I guess my first acknowledgement is to say that, yeah, Hildegard, who's one of our participants, was one of the professors when I came here to do my master's degree that turned me on to, thinking as a musician as opposed to just playing, and kind of challenging things that I would read, and kind of encouraged me to explore different avenues of importance to me as a musician and as a music educator. And I just want to take this moment to say thank you once again, Hildegard. And yes, great to see you. And yes, and Lenora is also a former colleague at the College of Music. And so anyway, this is an interesting opportunity for me because 20 years ago when I started the center, I was perhaps a little greener than I am now, and a little more naive than I am now, and a little pie in the sky-ish, I guess you would say, compared to where I am now. And, I'm looking back over the past 20 years a little bit and kind of thinking about, gee, what did we accomplish with all that enthusiasm, and where has it taken us? And I would imagine that all of you who are a little further down the road than I am have similar kinds of reflections and sentiments. And I'd be curious to see or to hear a little bit of what you think might be ways to move forward as I see the future unfolding from my standpoint, and particularly in a broad way. And I mean by continuing to struggle with the challenges associated with creating interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary collaborations at this university and other tier 1 research universities across the country. To me, this is something that I've aspired to be engaged with, but continue to struggle in finding a path forward inside of an institution like UNT and others to kind of create sustainable parity-laden relationships with disciplines across the campus that are critical to advancing the things that I'm interested in advancing. So I would welcome you and encourage you to respond to anything that I'm saying or ask questions at any time, please. It's nice to have a smaller group and I just miss the face-to-face interactions with people. I've been doing a lot of Zooms lately, and it seems like it's a one-way street mostly, and I would appreciate the interactive nature of our discussion today. So anyway, welcome. And can we quickly just go around, everybody introduce themselves and maybe describe what their background is in terms of discipline and particularly scholarship, just so we all understand where we're coming from. Jim, can you start?
Yes, I'm Jim Morrow, retired from KHPR. Chris, I think you worked with Scott Martin a bit in our department on the project a number of years ago. Yes. And my wife, Melba, is over here. She's retired as well.
Yes, it's good to see you, Jim. Thank you. And Clarice?
Clarice Luce. I was a technical services librarian for 23 years at the Willis Library, and then I was government documents librarian for another many years, and retired in 2008. And Larry is my husband.
I'm Larry. I worked for the university a long time, ended up in facilities planning, started out in institutional analysis, and I'm very much retired.
Hildegard? Gotta shut your mute off. Your mute is on, yeah.
Well, I retired early so I could do the writing that I didn't have time for while teaching. And that has been an issue between Chris and me for a long time.
What?
But I am music education, and I'm very much an educator first, who thinks that we have to deal with the human aspect of learning just as much as with the performance aspects of music making. And that's why I've always encouraged Chris to continue in his interest of music and medicine. My own background is sociology, music sociology.
John? Get your mute.
I'm John Todd. I retired from the Department of Political Science at UNT in 2013, and have been enjoying lots of work with UNTRA and other activities in the time since then.
Great. Martha? You have to unmute yourself.
I forgot to unmute myself. I was a librarian at UNT 27 years. I retired as head of reference there. And in my retirement, I enjoy playing my piano.
Fantastic. Paula?
I'm a retired public school teacher, but actually I'd worked at North Texas State College as assistant registrar, and then raised my family and taught at Denton High, and came back to actually retire from North Texas. My husband, John, behind me, we both graduated from UNT, and he's a retired physical therapist.
Wow, fantastic. Nice to meet you. Nancy?
Nancy Cameron, retired high school counselor. Bill, emeritus professor of history, retired back in 2009 from UNT.
Very nice to meet you.
Arts and Science Dean's office for a while.
Fantastic. Lenora?
I'm Lenora McCroskey, just married John Todd. I was in the College of Music with the keyboard and early music, and I was always fascinated, Chris, with what you were doing. You talked about hearing. First, I think you worked with the oral problems that musicians have. Being a trumpeter, that makes sense to me. For me, in early music, we don't have that problem, but we do have muscle and arm problems, and I think you had started to do that sort of work when I retired in 2009. So good for you.
Yeah. The person next to Lenora to my right with the red sweater, I don't see your name there. Yep. Go ahead. You got to unmute though so we can hear you.
I'm Arminda Jacobson, and I retired from Human Development Family Studies. I'm Chris's neighbor and have taught with his wife, Amy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. Donald? I have to unmute.
You're right. Okay, I'm from Raleigh. I'm not retired. I'm not from the university.
Yeah, Don is a friend of the UNT Retiree Association from our lifelong learning program.
Fantastic. Is Thomas, are you there? I don't see a video feed.
I'm here, not on video, but I spent 26 years as director of the international office at UNT. My wife Diane is with me here. She's a retired math high school teacher in math.
Fantastic. And Lily?
Hi, I actually work with Jordan. I work for Ollie, but this just sounded interesting. I thought I'd pop in and listen.
Oh, great. Well, what a cool, interesting group. There's a lot of connections here that I have personally, and then also to some of the focuses that we've had over the years, like Lenore was saying, with hearing loss and physical problems associated with music, and the international dimension, and so on. So anyway, just as a little historical background. So when I was pursuing my doctorate here, I had the great fortune to build a committee and explore different perspectives outside of the music education domain, I guess. And Hildegard and Will May, who were on my committee, let me incorporate ways of thinking from music therapy. I spent a lot of time over in Texas Women's University, and also with Jim Roberts in physics, and with the medicine school down at Fort Worth with Bernard Rubin, who was chief of rheumatology at the time, and electrical engineering faculty. That's before we had our College of Engineering, so it was with UT Arlington faculty, particularly George Kondrowski, and some other faculty who took me under their wings. And from my standpoint, that kind of education, that kind of educational experience was really formative for me. It gave me the ability to look at different things through various lenses, disciplinary specific lenses. And anyway, that all culminated in my desire to investigate the influence of music on people with rheumatoid arthritis pain. And I was able to set up a clinic lab scenario down in Fort Worth, and I was exposing mostly elderly, frail people who had severe rheumatoid arthritis to a vibrotactile stimulation that I was generating from acoustical energy in terms of, music. Musical energy was acoustic, transduced into mechanical stimulation. In addition to hearing it, would stimulate the nervous system in a way that potentially reduced pain. And so I was successful with that, and then received a couple grants and was able to go to San Antonio for a while. I conducted a double-blind placebo-controlled study of this technique with fibromyalgia patients, and then came back up to the Metroplex and worked with young adolescent females who were preparing to undergo spinal fusion surgery. And we were using this approach as a preemptive analgesia for the reduction of post-operative hyperalgesia. People who undergo this kind of surgery wake up, morphine gets worn off, and it's horrific pain. So we were vibrating them right before surgery, literally right in the operating room, before the surgeon would cut open these young people's backs and straighten out their spines. And around that time, Dave Schrader, who was the dean of the College of Music, some of you might remember him, was sort of taking an interest in me, and also the president of the Health Sciences Center at the time. And we started talking, and they were asking me questions like, that you're doing some really interesting things. What else should we be doing around here? What are you going to do, right? I mean, there was no job opening for somebody who was doing what I was doing, especially in music. And one of the things that I had been poking around with, it became very interesting on a personal level, and then also as a budding scholar as it relates to the education of musicians, was the lack of attention towards any occupational health issues associated with doing this activity. And the interesting part about this issue is that it's not new. In fact, there was a physician back in the 1700s, Bernardino Ramazzini, who was an Italian physician who is now considered the father of occupational medicine. He wrote his first textbook, Occupational Medicine, with the point that as a physician, he would want to know, what does my patient do? Because he was able to see these health patterns among his patient populations that represented the jobs that they were doing in the community. And he was steering the medical community to ask that question. You know, what do you do? I'd be much more likely to help you resolve this health issue if I understand what your occupation is. And then from that point in time, occupational medicine has evolved, and there's specialties in that. And it's even moved into arenas that are less work-like, but more entertainment, or in particular in sports, like sports medicine, for example, is a specialized occupational field of study to help athletes. And Bernardino Ramazzini, in his textbook, actually articulated those occupations that he was seeing in his community that had these patterns of health concerns. People that worked over here had certain skin diseases. People over here had a certain hand or back or whatever. And he included in his list of occupations the singer, the lute maker, and the music educator. This is 300 plus years ago. And it's fascinating to think about that when we think about our own history of educating musicians informally or formally. A lot of this discourse about these issues has not been part of our discipline at all. In fact, quite to the opposite. You know, when we introduced music education into the public schools in the United States, the argument was in part based on the benefits that being involved in a musical activity would have on one's health. Particularly Lowell Mason in Boston went to the school board and said, hey, you know, we're having all these respiratory problems due to all the pollution that we're spewing in Boston. And if we get kids playing clarinets and singing, it's probably going to help them deal with those kinds of problems. So, and since then, as Hildegard would know, our philosophical basis for music education really has been void of any acknowledgement that having a child or any person, you know, do something with fine motor control or sitting in a particular position without much movement for a long period of time, or exposing our ears to extensive noise that could have a negative effect on our ability to hear, all kinds of things. That just has not been yet incorporated into our discipline. So I was telling Dave Schrader and the president of the Health Sciences Center, you know, this is something that we could address. So in 1999, they let me establish what we called then the Texas Center for Music and Medicine. And that began the story that, you know, I kind of reflect back on 20 years later. And throughout that particular time, we've done all kinds of research related to, you know, just establishing patterns of occurrence, like prevalence rates for different kinds of musculoskeletal issues among different instrument groups, for example. You know, we've done a lot with piano, guitar, brass, clarinet, percussion. And we find these very, just like Bernardino Ramazzini said, you know, it's a reflection of what you do. So we would see very unique physical and hearing related and psychological and voice related problems among those people doing different kinds of musical activities. And when I think about what I did now, looking back, I would say my orientation to addressing this national problem was from the top down. And this is perhaps reflective of my naive awareness or naive understanding of the context back then. But I was bold enough to say, hey, why don't we first address this problem through our national accrediting body? So UNT, like 650 other schools of music in the United States, share an accreditation standard by the National Association of Schools of Music. And on the desks of all deans across the country of music schools, we have this document that reflects what schools should be doing. And in 2003, they added a statement saying schools should assist students in acquiring knowledge about performing related injuries from qualified professionals. And I remember reading that, asking myself, well, who is the qualified professional? You know, and how does a school do that? And central to that question is, you know, what is the fundamental etiology of these problems? What is the one factor that's common to these issues that we're talking about that are different from occupational health issues in general? And to me, that one common denominator is the idea that music itself is a verb, right? It's a doing. musicking, some might say, like Hildegard's friend Christopher Small. Musicking, the act of doing music, is the primary factor that drives risk. Therefore, in order to address this problem, we have to acknowledge that there are certain people in our discipline that dictate and manage the music making, like a conductor or a composer or a programmer, right? And they need to be aware of the consequences of what they're asking people to do under their direction in order to manage the risk. Now, that was a very, very bold and stark assault, I guess, if you will, on our traditions, because us to say, you know, hey, you're doing something that's hurting somebody, that's very different from what we've been having to respond to historically. But that was sort of the idea that I had in mind. In 2004, we were able to respond to that question that was in the that statement in the accrediting body and say, who is the expert? Well, if it's the music people, because it comes from doing music, we need to figure out what to do. How do we handle this? How do we approach it? And so I was able to get some money from the Grammy Foundation, National Endowment for the Arts, International Music Merchants, raised about $150,000 and had a 3-day conference here. And we brought people from 21 associations together and about five distinct disciplines: audiology, speech language pathology, psychology, psychiatry, and musculoskeletal health. And we had for 3 days a debate as to what we should be doing in schools of music. And it was fascinating because one group said, well, we need like clinical services. We need, you know, the physical therapist. We need the audiologist. We need the medical expert, just like sports medicine does for athletes. And they were advocating for that kind of addition to the School of Music context. Then there was another group that was saying, well, we need to have resources that help develop the musicians so that they're able to handle the demands of the music making activity. So we need people like, you know, yoga and stretching and, you know, Feldenkrais and Alexander technique and meditation and nutrition, all these kinds of things that would help somebody be more resilient, more equipped to handle the demands. And then there was that third group. Wait a minute, we need to focus on the demands themselves. That's what we need to address. And that's where I was. And I was part of the smallest group, I would think. And so anyway, we ended up having lots of conversations. In fact, I can pull up a little screen share here just to give you an idea. I pulled up some web pages. You can see a little bit. Here is the web page for the Health Promotion in Schools of Music. And there's the conference and the sponsors. And then we published a paper in 2006 that was a culmination of all this, kind of a consensus-based idea that we circulated to all music schools across the country. And we also sent it to the accrediting body. And we said, hey, we're all set. This is what we need to do. We need to label music schools as health promoting, right? And we defined that as the World Health Organization would. We said, this is the basis for moving forward. And we asked the accrediting body to go ahead and adopt that. And that's where I realized, you know, the machine doesn't turn on a dime. And after a couple of years of, you know, that's nice, Chris, but, you know, we'll get to it on our own time, I became more and more frustrated. And we kept going back and trying and nothing was happening. As you can imagine, this is a big level of accountability, responsibility, and liability, actually, for a school to acknowledge that, yeah, somebody who's majoring in piano performance could actually become injured due to how we have them play piano, for example, right? So anyway, this was going on, and we started to do more epidemiologic type research. And then we started, like Lenora was talking about, we started to study sound levels generated in the College of Music. And the reason why I picked that particular area of interest was because it's a quantifiable exposure that's generalizable to all human beings globally. So if I wanted to, for example, start studying the biomechanical forces that a human would experience with a certain instrument, it's hard to you can't basically come up with a threshold of exposure that would be generalizable in saying that that's risky for everybody. Everybody's different size, physical capacities are different. So we have lots of different thresholds, but in sound, there is a standard. It's adopted by OSHA, National Institutes of Occupational Safety and Health, right, NIOSH, and the World Health Organization. They all adopt this principle that if somebody's exposed to so much sound every day, they're at risk for hearing loss. And the reason why I wanted that generalizable index was because I could then say, in a school of music, we can see the levels generated. And if we buy into this belief that these levels can harm hearing, then there's an instance maybe, or two or three or whatever, that relate the risk to the music making activity. So I hung noise dosimeters in several rooms inside the College of Music for 2 long semesters. So 30 weeks of sound every day. We go in, we download a file, we had sound levels for every ensemble. And at the end of this runtime, we had, I think, 600 different educational activities. Now in the College of Music, we call them ensemble-based instructional activities. So when you're in orchestra, you're in jazz band, you're not taking an extracurricular class, you're actually in a course, you're getting credit. And the idea of that course activity is to help you learn how to play that music. So it's an engagement-based activity, but it is a course. And we had 600 different events that we measured. Did you think any of them exceeded the sound levels that would be labeled as risky to human hearing? You think any of them did? And Lenore's nodding her head up and down. Yeah. Well, in fact, the index that we were using represents the amount of noise exposure for a full 8-hour workday. Most of our classes were 50 minutes in length. Of the 600 different classes that we measured, 40% of them exceeded that 8-hour limit. So 40% of the 600 classes that we measured exceeded the National Institutes of Occupational Safety and Health threshold for deeming a workplace harmful to human hearing. Now, I can and I will, if we have time, argue why that metric does not apply and should not apply to music. For one thing, the modeling that generates that threshold is under the assumption that people do go to work 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week over a 40-year work life, which is not the case at all in music. Plus the frequency spectrum of the sound and the temporal modifications of the sound over time have a very different type of consequence to the cochlea. So we can't really use this metric in applying it to music-related activities. But nevertheless, at that time, I didn't really understand it that way. And I said, hey, we have this problem. And one thing led to another, and there was a guy down at TCU who was dean of the music school. He heard about this research, and he would have me down every semester and talking to his faculty and students. And when he heard about this research, he said, wow, you need to go to NASM, our accrediting body's national conference, and present this data. Now, simultaneously, they're ignoring me. And so I ended up going, I think it was in Arizona. I went to this national conference, and there were deans of music schools, and I was showing them this data and saying, hey, at UNT, 40% of 600 ensemble activities exceed this limit. And that's when people really started to pay attention and actually become a little nervous. Like, gee, well, what would we do if we were having that kind of problem? I don't know what to do. How do we manage our music making to reduce the risk? And if we can't, am I liable for that? So that led to some other things, including a national recognition that I was so fortunate to get by the National Institutes of Occupational Safety and Health. So in 2010, they had me going to Bethesda and talking about this work because it was a great interest to them. You know, hearing loss is a global problem. In fact, the World Health Organization right now has a task force, which I'm part of, that propagates the idea that 1.3 billion adolescents and young adults are at risk for hearing loss because we have excessive access to sound and music through these personal music players, cell phones, earbuds. So it's a problem. So anyway, I won this award, and at the same time, NASM kept pushing me off. And so I got this award, and this was involving the American Academy of Audiology, NIOSH, Performing Arts Medicine Association, and a couple other groups. And they said, what else can we do to help you? And I said, well, why don't we ask NASM if they would entertain a presentation by you as the experts at their national conference. So we wrote a letter, and hey, we want to invite I'm not saying we as me, but they. These are the global experts in hearing conservation. We want to come to your conference and tell you what we think about this issue. And I'll never forget it. I was in my office, and I got an email and saying, it was emailed to me telling me that the accrediting body was not interested in having this group come to the conference and talk about this issue. On their dime even, we're not interested. So all this research, all this effort was not producing any change until I got a phone call from a news reporter who had written an article for the USA Today newspaper a couple years earlier about marching band and hearing loss. And they had called me back then and asked me, for my opinion, and they cited me. And just out of the blue, this lady called, hey, Chris, remember me? My son's in marching band now in high school, and I'm just really curious, what's the status of all this stuff? You're still working on this. I know, I'm just looking for some, some updates. So I told her what I just told you, and she couldn't believe it. Yeah. So she said, let me call you back. And she did the next day and said, hey, guess what? I got approval to write a national expose in the Time magazine. We're going to write an article describing how the music discipline in the United States, as organized and administrated through our accrediting body, is reluctant to address these issues. And I said, well, here's the names of the board of directors, here's the president, here's all their contact information, and go ahead and ask them why. And she started doing that. I don't know exactly, I can't recall exactly how long it took, but it was less than 2 weeks, where Dean Scott at the time, who was here, he emailed me, he said, Chris, you got to come up here right away. So I went running up to his office. He said, look at this email. And it was an email that he got from the National Association of Schools of Music that was sent to all deans across the country saying, we are going to address these issues. And that's what stopped this article from propagating and getting written. So that brought about a new era. Now, how do we actually implement and move forward with this? And we're still working on that. There's lots and lots of work to do, but at least we got it into the culture at some level, where now it's a social norm to at least consider, recognize and consider that we need to be accountable and responsible to what we do musically, so that our students, ourselves, our audiences, and anybody involved with consuming or being active in our music making are not at risk to a point where it could be debilitating for life. And so we've been making progress with that. And one of the really interesting consequences of that extended into the public school domain. Who said they were a public school teacher? Or somebody was, yeah. So the Texas Education Agency Fine Arts Director heard about all this, got a hold of me and said, wow, we're just about ready to refine and update our Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills Fine Arts learning objectives. Should we be building something about this into these learning objectives? And I said, absolutely. A couple of years later, sure enough, there it is. And now today, the Texas Education Agency requires all choral, band, and orchestra teachers across the state, middle and high school, to meet learning objectives. So every kid learning music will be aware knowledgeable, and competent to manage their music making in ways that reduce risk to hearing, reduce risk for musculoskeletal injuries, vocal health problems, and hygiene-related problems. And still to this day, it's just been a few years, Texas is still the only school state in the nation that requires that. And you know, I'm going to go back, I'm going to toggle back over to some screen share thing just to show you a few things. So this is our center's webpage if you're interested in it. It has links to our clinical services here now. We have 3 physicians at the TCOM, or Texas College of Osteopathic Medicine in Fort Worth, who come up to campus and they service our music students. Last year, we were having 3 days of clinic just for our music majors. That just gives you some ideas to the extent that these students are looking for help. 3 days. This guy here, Saj Survey, he's, in fact, right now he's up for full professor of medicine. He's considered one of the foremost clinicians in the country, if not the world. His total focus as a physician is on helping the performing artists. And last year, we graduated the first fellow. It's unlike sports medicine, where you have a fellowship in sports medicine for physicians, there has never been anything like this for performing arts health. The Health Sciences Center established that, and we just graduated the first one this past year. And so here we have, you know, news items and a little bit about what's going on. Here's some of our clinical operations and so on and so forth. And then the pandemic hit. And of course, we tried to capitalize on that. We were worried about people, especially in the public schools, bringing their instruments back to their schools after being sent home for months. And we developed a series of videos and information packages for teachers. How do you clean your instrument? How do you consider the possibility that this virus could be inside of a clarinet or a trumpet? So we did that. And then here, actually, I'm going to do it up here. Last year, we were able to get a small NIH grant, which is designed to help facilitate the interface between us and the Denton Independent School District as a way to establish some models for how to indoctrinate and encourage and support the public school teachers to implement these kinds of things in the public schools. So our hope, and it's working a little bit, but we got sidetracked with the pandemic, to use Denton as a model for the rest of the state. We have great relationships with, I'm sure you'd recognize some of the people here, Victor and BJ from biomedical engineering and so on and so forth. So that's been a really nice project. Then here, this is our research tab. If you want, we can talk a little bit about this. I want to stop talking and answer questions. So here we just have a little list of research outcomes that we've been able to generate over the past few years. So here's some under the heading of national recommendations and policies. This is what we did after we had that large conference, and some things in music education. So you can see this is regarding that statewide mandate. And we've done a lot of work, by the way, with earplugs. In fact, I was threatened with lawsuits. I don't know if you remember, was it 2 years ago or last year, 3M was fined $10 million for selling earplugs to the military that they knew didn't work. And we have the same kind of problems with music. So companies are selling products that are intended to help musicians play music in ways that, you know, allow the musician to hear the sounds normally, but at lower levels. And I started challenging that notion and doing very precise analysis of earplugs, and found out that not only do they not meet that claim, they don't actually protect. And this became a really big issue nationally, and it's now permeated into the World Health Organization's national recommendations for music and hearing loss. some issues with voice. Here's some more papers on earplugs. Sound level. We had a dissertation in computer science engineering where we were able to design a system that we could put inside the rehearsal hall that would use big data and machine learning analysis to understand if and when and why elevated levels were coming from our ensembles. That led to several large grants. We haven't been able to get funding yet to instill into UNT an automated system that would provide that kind of feedback to our teachers. We know how to do it, we just haven't been able to get the fundings for it. And then hearing loss and marching band, a lot of performance anxiety, drug and alcohol related research. There's a lot of these kinds of issues. Now we're exploring a lot of sports psychology concepts like identity and issues related to depression and social support, of course, anxiety. We did some epidemiologic work and strings. We've done a lot with piano. This is the stuff Lenora was talking about. This is a really fascinating area because I'm going to get back out of this. This is one of those areas that showcase how gender issues can become important. I had a young Japanese piano player started working with me. She's very tiny, and she was working on her doctoral level recitals, and she wanted to play Debussy preludes. And the more she practiced, the more her hands hurt. She started to do some epidemiologic work here in the College of Music and found out, she's not alone. I think it was 86% of our piano majors were saying they have hand pain. Then she started to look further into that, and she found out that one of the foremost predictors of that hand pain were hand span. So the dimension from here to here. And we started taking these physiologic measures of our musicians. I got a huge database of all these anthropometric measures of the hands, and we found out, from here to here, the difference between the largest and the smallest hands is 4 inches. Now, if you got 4 more inches than another person and you're playing on a piano, you probably have a little advantage, right? And then come to find out that there's a history of the piano that started by a guy named Cristoforte, where the piano was the octave was a certain width, which is similar to what it is now, but then over centuries, it was variable, and a lot of the virtuosic literature was written on narrower pianos. And then we realized, and then about 100 years ago, Lenora would know more than me, men decided to standardize the width of the piano. So all these females that were smaller, Asian females that are smaller than Caucasian females, are having all these problems because of the ergonomic fit of the piano in their hands is not right. And so we bought some inserts, so now we can put into our grand pianos an ergonomically modified piano that brings it back to where it was when the literature was written. It's like Chopin, when he was, 8 or 10, he's writing pieces with octaves. He was a little boy. Well, that's because the piano was a lot narrower. So UNT is one of a very few number of schools around the world that actually offer students this kind of thing. So anyway, I get back to my list here. And then we have stuff related to woodwind instruments. We have brass instruments, percussion, and guitar, and so on. And one of the fascinating, more recent advances or opportunities, and this gets back to my original comments about how fortunate I felt when I was here as a student to be able to work with other disciplines. I really try to encourage that with my doctoral students. And it's hard. As you know, it's hard to facilitate students working with other disciplines, especially as researchers. But we've been able to do that. We have a related field of performing arts health. This semester, I have 15 brand new DMA doctoral level students interested in this. And every year they just keep coming and they're doing research, and now they're starting to get jobs at universities, not only because they're great performers and excellent on their instrument, but because they have this unique niche, this scholarly area that's hard to get anywhere else, and that distinguishes them, and it facilitates their contributions to the local school that needs to adhere to the new accreditation standard, right? So we had a young lady this past year graduate in May. Her name is Sarah Dunbar. And it's just a great story because it just showcases the promise of all this. So this young girl had 2 surgeries on her jaw. She's a multiple woodwind instrumentalist. Plays saxophone, oboe, flute, clarinet, and bassoon. She has to be an expert in all those instruments for her doctorate. Okay, and going back and forth from these instruments stressed out her mandible, the muscles here in her jaw, and they became really, really painful. She ended up having surgery. She worked her way out of that, became an expert. She did 2 concerto competition she won 2 concerto competitions on saxophone, gave her opportunities to play at Carnegie Hall twice. The same year, she won an international competition on flute, performed in Vienna. And that same year, because of our relationship with the Health Sciences Center, she was down digging into cadavers, studying the facial muscle anatomy of people in order to measure the activation patterns in the face as they would change when people go from, flute to clarinet to oboe. Right? So she's she's not only looking at the anatomy and physiology with Dr. Fisher in the anatomy lab down there, and then she's working with the biomedical engineers and how to use electromyographic measurements on the facial muscles of live people. And she went ahead and did that on herself as a case study, presented at an international symposium last year at UCLA, and won the award. So here we have, just superstar musician of international acclaim on 2 instruments, then does this kind of stuff and then gets hired. She started her first tenure track job, 3 months after she graduated. She's now up at Midwestern as a assistant professor. And I would assume that she's going to just take off. So that's the promise. So we got 10 more minutes. I'm talking way too fast. Maybe I shouldn't have had so much coffee right before this, but forgive me. Do you have any questions or comments?
Everyone, feel free to unmute yourself if you have anything to ask or add.
I'm just kind of in awe, and I wish I had known more about this when I was there, when I was teaching. I don't even know what to ask or say. I mean, I just kind of, oh my goodness, Chris, it's just fabulous. And I think that, we've known for a long time that kids with earbuds were going to run into trouble. And I'm glad to know that the schools now have to address it. And I can imagine the trouble you would have had, as you explained, getting attention for this work and this study and for the health of our kids. It's really important. And I'm proud that it's at UNT, and I'm proud that it's Texas that's leading the way. We get bum raps on so many things. It's nice to have something really good. So, yeah, and congratulations with your team.
Thank you, Lenora. One of the things that I kind of reflect back on, I came from New England. I'm a Yankee. I grew up in Holyoke, Massachusetts. When I came here, I just felt like I was in like this bigness, I'm in Texas. I don't know what it was. And I just felt like, wow, I can go big down here, and again, naive and green, but looking back, I feel pretty good about what we've been able to accomplish. But there is something about Texas and music education. There's no question about this. The public school music education machine in Texas far surpasses any other state in the nation.
Very true. Very true. Well, I spent a lot of time in New England too. And when I moved down here, people said, Lenora, you're going, what are you doing? You're going to Texas? Why are you going to Texas? And then they fuss about football. I said, hey, football drives the bands, and the bands drive the orchestras. And just exactly what you said. It's a huge public school advantage here in music.
Yeah. By the way, we've been able to export this. Show you. know, I get, you know, you never know what's going to come into the class. A couple of years ago, I had a young lady from China. I have quite a few foreign students that are interested in this. And this one girl, Jiayue Liu, she's an amazing singer, working on her doctorate in singing. Here she is here. After one class, she looks at me, she says, "This is unbelievable. I never heard about this. I need to bring this to China." And well, sure enough, last summer, we were over there. We met with faculty and students from 4 major Chinese cities, including Shanghai. And it was unbelievable. Now she's over there right now figuring out how to, you know, get herself positioned after she gets her doctorate so she can keep up the good fight over there. It's amazing. And then there's another one here I wanted to show you too. Well, this is the stuff at the World Health Organization. I don't know if you guys know Dr. Gopal in audiology. She's, I guess I thought her picture was here. This is a very fascinating international thing. So we had China, and then we also have, was it 2 years ago, I was down in South Africa and helped a former student of mine who actually came to UNT on a Fulbright after apartheid was lifted. He grew up as an Indian South African. His parents were enslaved from India. And he grew up under apartheid. After it was lifted, he ended up getting a Fulbright after applying 10 times. Came here to get a doctorate. In fact, Hildegard was one of his mentors. And he ended up graduating. And he had a couple academic jobs in the United States. And then 9/11 hit, and they told him he had to go home. And then at the last minute, they said, "No, you can stay here." He was at some university up in New England. And he was doing great. And then he just said, "You know what? I'm going back home. They need me down there." And he's now the director of the University of South Africa's Music Foundation. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the higher education scenario down there, but that's a 750,000 student university. It's like the largest community college in the world. And this guy is just unbelievable. It's all about this stuff, you know, and he just launched the South African Association for Performing Arts Health. He had me down there to help do that. And so we could see these tentacles kind of reaching out and influencing the world. It's just really rewarding. But again, back to my first point, I just wanted I want your feedback on this. Why is it that universities like UNT, Tier 1 research universities, struggle to develop collaborative academic programs? Why is it so hard to initiate and sustain with parity across disciplines so that new directions can thrive? You know, ever since World War II, we started to silo our universities, right? Hyper-specialization, STEM fields. And we built this siloed infrastructure that it makes it very difficult to go horizontally. We have so much promise here, but it's extremely difficult. In fact, the Carnegie Foundation has been pushing transdisciplinary approaches. National Academy has been pushing it. The National Science Foundation has been pushing it. It's really, really hard. Our College of Music is in a silo. We have all these structures, and we have the College of Engineering over here. We have education over there. And to figure out how to interact in ways that ensure parity and sustainability on an academic level is the biggest challenge I foresee in the immediate future. And the reason why it's so important, get back to like what Jim was mentioning, you know, we have a psychology program that specializes in sports psychology, right? It's one of the most notable sports psychology programs in the country. A lot of our PhD psychology majors come here because of that. How much tweaking would it take to make another specialization called performing health psychology? So our music majors could benefit from what they're doing there, And they could benefit from understanding the music discipline, so we can have performing arts health psychologists just like we have sports psychology. Audiology is the same way. There's not a program anywhere in the world. In fact, I was just part of a task force paper that articulated the need for audiology training to change so that they're more equipped to deal with socioacoustics or sound and hearing loss related issues just due to contemporary life. Music is at the center of that. They don't know how to deal with it. They don't research it sufficiently. They don't train audiologists to support the music community. Here we have two entities, audiology and music, and it's just so hard. Wouldn't it be great to allow those to work together to develop a specialization, not only in music, but also in audiology?
Dr. Chesky, I actually have a question. It doesn't relate to the academic side, but you mentioned the inserts that they developed for the piano for people with different hand size. And as someone who played string bass in grade school and play bass guitar now, lifted a lot of heavy amps, and not a large person, I'm curious, what is the level of interest from private sector instrument builders and different companies in this kind of research in terms of developing different options for people of different sizes and abilities to play various instruments?
Yeah, not that high. And also, it again, back to the idea that the way we do is more important than what we do it with. And let me give you an example. So clarinet, probably on the face, a very benign instrument, right? Who's going to have pain when they play the clarinet? Well, actually, there's a tremendous amount of pain in the right thumb hand region. Because when you play the clarinet, all these biomechanical forces are pushing in a direction of the thumb that wreaks havoc on this area. Our epidemiologic studies show that this is very traumatic. A lot of clarinetists actually have to retire because of dysfunctional hand. So we put a sensor with biomedical engineering on the back of the clarinet to quantify these forces in different vectors. And then we started looking at the way those forces are generated under certain conditions, particularly certain notes. You know, you play one note on a clarinet and all your fingers are down, the forces along the barrel of the clarinet are gonna be a lot less than if you have no fingers down, right? It's actually this way. So we mapped all that out and we found out that there's one note that's really, really risky, and it's G, open G. It's the note where all your fingers are off the clarinet except for that one thumb contact point. Okay, now, so we want to reduce the risk. And we ask ourselves, what is the music pedagogy in the middle school band all about? And you open up the beginning clarinet book, page 1, it tells the kid play what note?
G.
G. The whole book is G, G, G. All the little musical excerpts, G, 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 right? If you played B, you would reduce the risk by 75%. And then we actually studied the influence of an elastic neck strap on those forces, published papers, scientific peer review, showing that the elastic neck strap, and we had clarinet professors here that drove all this, by the way, and even if a kid didn't have, a music major didn't have pain, they would advocate for this because it would free up their technique. And so we have data, published data, on the influence of the neck strap to reduce the risk, and published it. And then, I don't know, this is several years ago, I had a call again from a mother who had a daughter in Denton High School who made all-state orchestra. Now, all-state orchestra in Texas on clarinet means you're something, right? You're a big deal. And mom's telling me, hey, my daughter's got all these hand problems, her right hand, she's been to several physicians, they don't know what to do. I was poking around on the internet, I found an article that you wrote about neck strap. And she said, you know, do you think I should have my daughter try that? I said, absolutely. Absolutely. She calls me back a week later and she says, we got it. She tried it. She likes it. It helps her. She brought it to school. And guess what? The band director said, nope.
Oh, no.
Not in my band. We don't use neck straps. The traditions themselves, like the piano and like the, you know, and this actually extends into the artistic freedom conversation, you know? When is something just beyond the pale where you shouldn't be doing it, even though it is an artistic activity? And here's a case where we had a very traditionally oriented band director who never heard about this, doesn't believe in facilitating these kinds of challenges. You know, if it hurts now, you're probably building up strength and you're going to be stronger for it. So just keep going. So we think of all these issues biologically, psychologically, and sociologically, right? Biopsychosocial frameworks. And it's social and behavioral sciences. So we have to look at the broad social constructs and address them as well. I don't know if that answered your question, but biomedical engineering, by the way, has had numerous senior design projects focused on these issues. In fact, this past year was a shame because we had to shut down because of COVID, but there was a group working on a sensor array that allowed us to measure position, acceleration rates of a flute while playing and connected to muscle activity. So you could quantify the extent that the muscles were being taxed based on the postures of the instrument. And another group was working on a sensor array they were putting on the fretboard of guitars so you can measure the amount of force, right? Just like that picture in the front of my webpage, we got that thing on the trumpet. That's a biomechanical force measurement thing. So we can see, you know, playing trumpet, you push that thing into your mouth, you can hurt your lip, you can break a tooth, you know. So engineering has been very involved, and it might be at some point in the future where we do collaborate with companies and try to come up with innovative solutions that could include new instrument designs. Carbon fiber, for example. We just published a paper on trombone related problems, and trombone's a heavy instrument, and you hold it up like this and you have your hand positioned like this, and then the other, you know, hand is moving the slide. Well, all the pain is on the side that's holding it up. The whole upper extremity and the neck are having a lot of problems. So one solution is to reduce the amount of gravity, right, or force due to gravity, biomechanical forces down, by changing the material. And there's a company in Dallas by a former student actually who's making carbon fiber instruments that reduces the weight significantly.
That is helpful. My nephew just started playing trombone, so I'm just going to keep that in mind.
Yeah, if you're interested in papers on this, there's a journal called Medical Problems of Performing Artists. Medical Problems of Performing Artists. And you would see that paper in that journal, as well as many others.
All right, well, we definitely want to be respectful of your time, so please let us know when you need to go. I don't know if anybody else has any other questions.
I just think it's fascinating. Thanks, Chris. It, you know, from someone who's not, well, I was a band player, but flute player, but still not involved in music right now. I think it's very fascinating to see where this could go.
Thank you. It's not boring, that's for sure.
No.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and I just appreciate the opportunity again to tell you my story and to pass on a little slice of what we're doing in the College of Music. And again, kind of leaving you with the idea of how do we reposition our relationships across colleges to facilitate more transdisciplinary interactions. That's man, if I could get to where you're at, where I'm retired, and I look back and say, man, I had my hand in making that happen more than it does, I'd really feel good about it.
I think there's a good chance you'll accomplish that.
I think you will too. We're going to look at your webpage. I think it'll be fascinating to look at your webpage.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. I know it's hard, and I know it's hard for the student, it's hard for the faculty, it's hard for the administration of these kinds of programs. But, you know, Einstein was very clear, you know, knowledge is like a tree, you know, it all comes from the same place and it goes out into these branches. But if these branches are interacting to produce new branches, you know, growth is going to be stifled. We have to facilitate that.
So in the yard right behind mine, there are two trees that have grown together.
That's it. That's the imagery. Medicine and music, right? Yeah, music and medicine, sports and music, you know, science.
Send him a picture. It's a new.
I will take a picture and send it to you.
That's great. I've got
as soon as the weather warms up.
Right.
Right.
Well, anyway, so thank you very much for hanging in there. And if you have any questions or comments, I'd appreciate it, especially the advice that you might have as esteemed colleagues who've been down the path a little further than me. I'd appreciate any feedback, so please feel email. In the meantime, go vote, right?
Oh gosh, yes, go vote.
Already
did.
Thank you so much. I hope everybody has a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jordan.
Bye.
Everyone, take care.